then there might be higher beings in the cosmos that originally manifested what we call species, the various forms that organisms take. I think it was part of his ultimate conclusion about evolution that things like that might also be involved, which I think is why Darwin became very upset with him.
Yeah.
Well, I think if we look carefully at Wallace's writings in the last part of my chapter about Wallace, I look at how his parapsychological research influenced his thinking about evolution, especially the evolution of the human form. He began to think there was something special about it that really couldn't be explained by the mechanisms that were involved in the production of other species. When I speak of devolution, I use the word in a few different ways, but the primary way that I use it is that what we really are, in essence, is conscious personalities, and that conscious personal self is not reducible to chemistry or physics. It has its own independent existence. And I would say we all originally exist on a platform where we manifest a form of pure consciousness or spirit, if you want to put it in a religious terminology, but I prefer the term pure consciousness. I prefer that terminology. So in that sense, none of us are from the world of matter. We're from some higher realm. And if we remained in that realm, there wouldn't be any necessity for gross physical forms. It's only when we come to the world of matter that we require a vehicle that will allow us to function in this alien element. As humans, we're normally meant to live on the land. But if we want to exist under the water for more than a few seconds, we're going to need some kind of vehicle that will allow us to function in that alien element. We'll need a diving suit or a submarine. And then we have to ask, well, where do those diving suits or submarines come from? Well, I would say they come from engineers who understand that if a human being is going to exist under the water, they need some type of vehicle that will allow them to do that. So the engineers design and build those things. So, but I would say on the level of consciousness, there are beings that have the intelligence to manifest from their forms in a kind of biological process, but not the one that we're familiar with. It's more like what Wallace observed, mediums manifesting ectoplasmic forms that take on their own identities. So those forms are, I would say, are manifested by these higher beings.
With me is Michael Cremo, who is the co-author of Forbidden Archaeology, The Hidden History of the Human Race, and also author of Human Devolution, an alternative to Darwin's theory, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory. Welcome, Michael.
Good to be here.
It's good to be with you once again as well. And I'm so delighted that you took an interest in your book, Human Devolution, and the work of Alfred Russel Wallace, because he's a very important person in the history of science, and particularly important in the history of psychical research and parapsychology. It's an important chapter in that history that's usually overlooked.
Yes, the history of Wallace, his actual history, is generally overlooked in biology textbooks as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes mentioned that he was, along with Darwin, the co-founder of the theory of evolution by natural selection. Darwin had gone on the voyage of the Beagle. He was a naturalist on this ship that journeyed around the world, and it was many of his observations, such as those he made of the tortoises and the finches on the Galapagos Island, that originally suggested to him his theory of evolution, the idea that species are not immutable types, but merge one into the other.
Mm-hmm.
So he had, after that voyage, gone to reside in the countryside in England, and he began to formulate his theory and write a book about it, the book that was later published as The Origin of Species, but it was taking him a long time to do it, actually a couple of decades at least. And then one day he received in the mail a letter from Alfred Russel Wallace, who was a younger, at that time, English biologist or naturalist who had gone out to Southeast Asia. And in his communication to Darwin, Wallace revealed he had come up with the exact same theory that Darwin was working on, a theory of evolution by natural selection. And he enclosed in his letter a paper that he said was going to be read at a meeting of the Linnaean Society of Biological Scientific Society in London. So this was somewhat shocking for Darwin, because the etiquette in the scientific world is the first person who presents a theory gets their name on it.
Gets the credit,
Gets the credit. So Darwin consulted with his scientific friends and asked them what he could do about this. And he said they advised him the proper thing for you to do would be to ask Wallace if he would agree that a paper by you, Charles Darwin, would be read at the same time at the Linnaean Society in London. And that way you will
both get credit.
Both get credit for the theory. So that was agreed upon. And for a long time, the theory was called the Wallace-Darwin theory. You don't hear that very much anymore. When Wallace was out in Southeast Asia, he'd gotten sick and he was laid up in a hospital for some time. And he was recuperating, and reports began to come from Europe about mesmerism, hypnotism, paranormal research, and things like that. And he was initially very skeptical about these things. But when he returned to England, he began to look into the matter himself. And he became convinced that there was something to it, from the scientific point of view. And he actually published a report directed towards his scientific colleagues about what he regarded as the scientific evidence for the supernatural. I think that